Hello, my name's Andrew, and today we're doing a first impressions review of the Xero Scrambler Mid. So as the name suggests, this is a mid-weight zero drop boot for hiking and backpacking, and it's got a combo of like some nice padding and protection and a really durable, tough sole, as well as a breathable upper that's pretty useful for all seasons. So yeah, let's check them out. Up front, you've got a medium-wide toe box, and there's some good protection here from stubbing your toes if you're going on bigger rocks or trying to avoid roots. And there's definitely a lot of protection all around the boot. Some reinforcement here, some reinforcement along the bottom, and wraps around the heel as well. And then something I like about this boot is they've got this extra, almost like a little foam layer, and I found that it works pretty well for water resistance. It just helps seal that layer, which is usually where the water comes in. And this isn't a waterproof boot whatsoever, but because of the extra protection, I find that you can get water up to here without any leakage, which is nice. Obviously it can splash over the top, but because it has a little closer woven mesh upper, I find that like when I was out hiking this morning, when I got stepped in some puddles, there's the water coming over the top. It kept my feet a little bit drier than a more open mesh. So looking at the laces, I like these loops here because they give you a little bit of tension where you can kind of make it tight here, loose here, tight here. So if you have something that hurts like on the top of your foot, or you just prefer it that way, like maybe you want more looseness in the front of the shoe and then tighter up here, whatever you want, that helps with that. And then you've got a pair of lace locks here, so you can just kind of like whip the laces around there, and as opposed to having to go on an eyelet, it just allows you to open up the boot really fast if you have stones in there or whatever, you want to shake them out. On the sides, there's some really nice padding here. I actually love how the upper of this feels. There's something that really like sticks out to me, when I was going out for my hike this morning, it was like, it just kind of, the upper of the shoe just sort of like disappeared. It felt soft. It's not as light as some other boots, but there's nothing in particular that's like annoying me, which is great. That's kind of like what I look for in a barefoot boot. And then inside, I can't really show you because it's too deep in there, but you have about 1 millimeter of padding, so it's just a tiny bit of softness above the sole. And speaking of the sole, it's got a Michelin rubber sole, so it's actually quite grippy. There's some good tackiness to it, and then a decent amount of flexibility vertically. Really not that much flexibility at all. We talked about this with the Ridgeway lower one yesterday. You can, if you really apply some force to it, you can get it to bend, but yeah, it's really not a full barefoot shoe. I would more consider it like a minimalist zero drop boot, but it is more flexible than your average hiking shoe, and definitely lighter too. It's like ridiculously light for how tall it is for a mid-cut boot. In terms of the tread, it's got a aggressive tread, but the lugs aren't super deep, which I like because it makes it a little bit more versatile for hiking on multiple types of dry and wet terrain. And if you have like lugs that are deeper, like around 4 millimeters, like Vivo Barefoot soft ground sole has that, and it tends to trap mud, which is kind of annoying because it's really good for like going down hills, but then if it starts to build up mud, then the tread's not doing you that much good. So yeah, a little bit lighter tread like this is nice. It also has a grip on the side, which I've not seen from any boot before. That's kind of cool, because that's where your foot's gonna come down if you're walking with more of a forefoot stride, or if you're going up hills. And then in terms of the tread shape, it's got like a chevron lug, so they're like this in the front, so if you're going up the hill, it's going to give you traction pulling this way, and then you can see the opposite direction in the back, so if you're going down a hill, it's going to hold you from slipping and you're going on your heel. In terms of the ground feel, there's a little bit, it is a pretty thick sole. It's an 8.5 millimeter sole, so kind of on the higher end for barefoot shoes, but I did get a little bit of ground feel if you're going over like larger rocks. Actually, funny enough, I got more ground feel than I got from the Ridgeway, which really didn't have any at all. So yeah, I mean, that's something nice if you're someone who is transitioning into barefoot and you don't want to go all the way, but you do want to start getting a little bit of ground feel. Or like I said, if you're going on a longer backpacking trip and you don't want something super heavy and clunky, yeah, this would be a good option. In terms of breathability, I think it works up to about 60 to 70 degrees before it starts to get a little too warm for me. And that's pretty typical of a higher cut boot because it is trapping a little bit more moisture, even though it does have the mesh on there. But yeah, I think it's good for all seasons. I've tried it out in 30 degrees for a walk, and then it's warming up today, got up to the 60s, and it still feels pretty good for there. But if you get above that, it might start to get warm. However, one thing that does help with that is wearing a pair of Injinji merino wool toe socks. And wool is extremely breathable and temperature regulating, but also having the toes just gives some material between your toes that helps move moisture and air and, you know, all that stuff. So I find these are much better than like a cotton or synthetic sock. And then with a boot like this that has a little bit of breathability, but some decent water resistance as well, I find that like in winter, you can also add a second layer of smart wool, which helps make it a little bit warmer. And then you could also add a wool felt insole, which doesn't really change the feeling of the shoe, but just adds a little bit of extra warmth to the bottom. However, Xero does also give you a insole, removable insole that comes with the shoe. And this has their typical perforation on the bottom. So one scenario where I like this more than a wool felt insole, even though it's not quite as flexible, is where you're going through super wet conditions and you're expecting water to get up over the top of the shoe to make it kind of damp. And what the insole will do is, because it's perforated, it'll just keep the water under your foot so you're not sloshing around in it. All right, so that's the Scrambler Mid, but another good option would be the Vivo Barefoot Tracker Textile. And this is another mid-cut boot with kind of mid-weight feel to it. It's a little bit heavier than Xero. It's also got some really nice padding and protection here that's comfortable for longer backpacking trips or hikes, and similar type of lace loops here for the tension, and then lace hooks on the top for a quick release. It does have, I think, a little bit wider toe box for me, and then it is completely waterproof. So this one's a little bit better for cold weather or really wet conditions. In terms of the sole, it's got a 7mm sole, so slightly thinner and definitely more flexible. And it's got some better horizontal flexibility. And in terms of the lugs, it's a similar setup because you've got some space in here for soft ground, but they're also a little bit flatter. So they work, I think, a little bit better for firm ground. They're kind of like a 50-50 blend, whereas if you look at the Scrambler Mid, they are a little bit more geared towards soft ground and higher grip. And if you spend a lot of road mileage on these, then it could wear down these smaller lugs here, even though they do give you some better grip for wet terrain. But another good option would be the Vivo Barefoot Tracker Decon. And this is kind of like a lighter weight version of the Textile because it's got a softer leather upper, a nice wide toe box. This is the widest of the ones we looked at so far, and just more flexible overall. Like you can see with the upper, it's very easy to bend it. And then you've got this breathable wool blend section here, which is nice if you're using it in a little bit warmer temperatures. Like you can definitely get it up to the 70s, but like the other ones, if you kind of pair up a wool felt insole with a couple layers of socks, you can also wear it in winter. So a really versatile hiking boot. The only thing I don't like about it is that it's got a little bit more narrow ankle in the back, and I find that it can add a bit of pressure on your ankle bone, especially on the outside. So you can kind of fix that just by adding an extra layer of sock for a bit of padding, or just tying the laces a little bit looser. In terms of the tread, I think it's got the same sole as the Textile, but because it's so flexible and because there's no waterproofing layer, it doesn't provide as much protection as the other two, and certainly not as much protection as the Scrambler Mid, which, yeah, not much is getting through that sole. But if you press on the sole of the Tracker Decon, you can see that you're going to get a ton of ground feel, even though you do have these thicker lugs here. And then for our last option, we have the Saltitch Outdoor. This happens to be the insulated version, but they have a regular version for summer as well. And this boot has a ton of protection in the toe. It's pretty comparable to the width of the Tracker Decon, so a lot of room for your toes to splay out in the front. It's very protective. Like, this would be a good work boot. In the same way that the Scrambler Mid has that nice protection at the toe, but it's almost even a little bit harder with the Saltitch Outdoor, and then that wraps all the way around the sole. So it's a really great work boot if you're working in like kind of rubble or maybe some broken glass and stuff like that. In terms of the upper, it's leather all the way around. It's a bit softer leather. The winter one actually has a waterproof lining, which is great, but the summer one's a little bit more breathable. And the upper feels really nice. It's tough, but it's got some good flexibility to it where it's not bothering you or, you know, feeling tight like the Tracker Decon around the ankles. And then in terms of the sole, it's actually got a 3.7mm sole, which sounds super thin, but it's Vibram. And actually you could see, you know, it's got some firmness to it. It will flex, you know, if you apply a little bit of pressure to it. So it's, you know, it's like a medium flexible shoe. But it's also very tough and hard with the rubber. And because it's so thin, you also still get a lot of ground feel. So it's I don't know, it's kind of a best of all worlds feel, but it doesn't have a very thick tread like the other ones. So this would be mostly a boot that you would use for either flat ground, or if you do go on hills, it would definitely have to be dry, because if it's wet, there's not enough depth on the lugs here. So yeah, those are some good options for barefoot and zero drop hiking boots. But if you want to support the channel, you can shop with the referral links down below, browse and filter more products on my website barefootwear.org, or watch my zero drop transition video to learn more about barefooting. Finally, if you have a question about the Xero Scrambler Mid or about barefoot shoes in general, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time. Peace.